Governor Braun, thank you so much for being with us today. I have to say, I have been a huge fan of yours for many years, being part Hoosier myself, spending a lot of time in southern Indiana, especially during the summers, harvesting watermelons in the Wabash River Valley. So it's my honor really to be here with you today, because honestly, you were MAHA before MAHA was cool. Can you tell me a little bit? Let's go back to your days in the Senate. Can you tell me a little bit about that time, some of your initiatives and your learnings from that time in the Senate, driving what we now know to be MAHA?
So I even want to go back a little way before that, because everything I brought to the Senate was a function of not having grown up on a farm. I lived on the northern edge of the big metropolis of Jasper, and being from southern Indiana, that was not a big town. And went to Wabash College and out to business school out east. And then my wife and I are both entrepreneurs. She wanted her own business. So I got mine start at it 3 years later, back in '81. But in the late '80s, I got involved with agriculture as a tree farmer, and then in the mid-'90s into the row crop side of farming. So it's been a navigation from now living on a farm ever since I moved back to my hometown and being involved with it. Way before MAHA and Make Indiana Healthy Again, the proudest thing I did was fixing our own health care plan in my business. When it finally took off, and struggling for those first 17 years, we talked about it earlier, what was my biggest issue? Healthcare. Yeah. And every year you'd hear how lucky it is, it's only going up 5 to 10%. In that renewal meeting back in 2008, I got the insurance companies to tell me a lot of truth, how much money they were making on my plan. I self-insured that day. Then I said, what do you really do to turn the tide on high healthcare costs? I said, well, the system is built upon expensive remediation, and it ought to be more aimed at wellness and prevention. Yeah. I thought that's a little philosophical coming from the insurance companies, but I took it seriously, and there completely changed that to where it was not about expensive remediation, enabled my own employees to become healthcare consumers, gave them the tools to stay well. Proudest thing I've done in business or politics, government, is fixing health care in my own business. No premium increases in 17 years. That I've never heard out of any other business. So it got me tilted towards diet, exercise. How do you prevent chronic disease? Mm-hmm. And that's why MAHA was easy. And when I tried doing some of that in the Senate, we didn't have an administration that was interested in it, because first 2 years were with the Trump administration, so we did a lot on healthcare reform. Sure. Generally that got taken to court. Then it was with the Biden administration that was for expensive remediation, doing more healthcare through government without mentioning wellness and prevention. Now we've arrived.
Yeah, well, I can certainly say, Governor, I think that ultimately when we talk about just the overall health of the nation's population, it all begins with prevention. And you have taken a very big step. In fact, you were one of the first as governor in Indiana to lead the way and get a waiver, because we all know that ultimately it is really our most vulnerable populations that rely on SNAP nutritional food assistance. And those are the folks that we really need to ensure have access to healthy, better for you foods, and you have led. And tell me a little bit about your day yesterday. You were with Secretary Rollins and other governors from other states who just yesterday got their waivers signed by the Secretary. Tell me a little bit about that, and really what led you to that place where you wanted to take the lead for Hoosiers and health, and what was it that made you step out front and lead that initiative in getting a SNAP waiver?
Well, let's go to my Senate career then. I was on health, education, labor, and pensions, and I'm guessing health is probably the most important part of that all 6 years. Crowning achievement was to get a guy named Bernie Sanders to actually co-sponsor a transparency bill that also engendered competition within a broken healthcare system. But I remember all the difficulty it was to even get a bill introduced, let alone get 60 senators that would agree to it.
Sure.
Republicans generally are flat-footed on some of these issues, thinks our healthcare system is maybe free market. It's not. It's got a lot of things that need improvement. And the other side wants the government to run everything. So being a governor, I'm getting along with the legislature. We did more to move that along. But then all the things that I did in my own business now become applicable to where it's going beyond the conversation, which is what you mostly have in the Senate, to enterprising governors actually getting stuff done. So my only regret is we weren't the first state that got that waiver approved, but I think we were second or third, and now
you were very early. You were very early.
And now there are cascades of governors that know it makes sense, and we finally got an administration that'll get a lot of this stuff done, hopefully administratively, because if not, then you got to go back to reconciliation, where you can weave some policy in with the guidelines on budget issues.
Sure.
And if not, it'll be how do you convince 60 senators to come along? And for people that aren't interested in a wholesome food supply and having SNAP with nutrition, the big word in SNAP, actually having wholesome food for our taxpayer dollars that are being spent, I'm interested to see if we can overcome the normal barriers. I'll be a big proponent of it, showing what we can do back in our own states, and hopefully we'll get it worked out on a more national basis.
Yeah, so leading by example, Governor Braun, and hopefully more governors will continue to join with you in this stand.
I feel good about that.
Yes, and Indiana having such a special place in my heart, because that's really where I started my business, was in the Wabash River Valley on a small melon farm. And today I'm happy to say that we actually get to grow in 7 different states, primarily fresh fruits and vegetables. I'm curious, you recently, back in April, signed a series of executive orders. Are there any particular EOs that you signed that ultimately you feel sort of most passionate about? I know there was one that I was very excited about, and that was the group that you put together to study how we bring more locally grown fresh fruits and vegetables, and how you work with ranchers and farmers getting more Indiana food to those consumers. Can you tell me a little bit more about that, and is there anything that you're really passionate about in the executive orders?
So I think it's interesting when you try to change the dynamic that's been around so long. We've all probably had farm markets. We know for produce, melons, and all that seasonal. We love it, but it's not there the entire year around. It's also maybe something that has not gotten fully integrated into the food supply like we'd like to see it. All the different ways through hydroponics and all the ways you can bring the farm directly to the consumer. That is called creative disruption by many, and we're just in the early stages of it. So what I'm doing back there is trying to get that formalized beyond maybe just the seasonality of it, and more broadly to where we take highly processed food out of the equation, wean it out over time, and get back to where we know you're getting much better nutrition as opposed to sometimes empty calories. So that's going to be my goal as governor in Indiana, and I'm going to do it comprehensively across the state. And agriculture in general is second, and we're the biggest manufacturing state per capita. We get credit for that often. Sadly, healthcare is now eclipsing even it when it approaches 20% of our state's GDP, spending some of the highest amounts of money on it with some of the poorest outcomes. It's perfect timing for it because food and that whole approach holistically to wellness is now finally finding its time, and you couldn't be in a better place than farming. Future generations of farmers want to know what else can we do other than that high intensive use of inputs to where it's so hard to carve out a bottom line, and it's gotten worse over time as opposed to something that might make more sense and be more nutritional to boot.
Yes, on-farm diversification. You know, the way that you have led connecting farmers and really consumers to each other, I feel like in the time that I've observed your leadership, both in the Senate and as governor, you have always put farmers first. And I want to say thank you for that. But I also want to touch on, as we move deeper into this MAHA era, what is it that you are doing now, and what do you anticipate doing in the future to continue to bring farmers in, give them a seat at the table, and work with farmers? Because, as you know, I mean, it's every year, it's a different growing season, and you mentioned the seasonality of melons, and no two seasons are alike. And many farmers, you know, we face a lot of challenges in the farming community, and whether it's weather issues, pest issues, you know, a myriad of issues as a farmer, you know this. What are you doing to make sure that farmers are a very integral part of the decision-making process as you continue to lead? And tell me what their seat at your table looks like in Indiana.
So I think, again, it'll take the approach I learned in the real world for 37 years of being an entrepreneur, building a logistics and distribution business. And you've got those elements in your own family business. And for anybody out there listening, when you want to retire early and get into politics and government, come see me, because it's easier when you're a senator and now a governor when you've actually done something in the real world. So that's where I take my cue. Most folks have not signed the front side of a paycheck when they become a senator. Even as a governor, you'd think that that would almost be a requirement. So you're going to know your options. You're going to know how to think out of the box. But for farmers, they so often are dealing with how do you get through the next growing season? And can I take risk on diversification? Can I look for new horizons when it's so hard just to make ends meet for the typical farm operation? So I'm going to try to be that portal for information. Got the first bill passed as a U.S. Senator that involved farmers benefiting from maybe being a steward of their land and being rewarded for it, the Growing Climate Solutions Act, to where it costs nothing but takes good practices to maybe push a more organic approach, less resource intensive. And that actually passed in a dynamic that you couldn't believe it would. So government's generally in the way and slower. So as a governor, I'm going to make sure our Farm Bureau, all the farm organizations in a state where it's so important to our economy, is not being hampered with rules and regulations that make it difficult, and really be there. Because the most important thing I found in any business is how do you keep it growing? And if you're not willing to embrace risk, try new things, I always say you can get caught in that cul-de-sac. because the hardest part in any business is growing revenues. And here, I'm going to be entrepreneurial as our governor to make it easy for farmers to take a peek at what the future generations may need that might be different from what you're currently doing, and still be successful as you may choose to transition and to get into things that you're not familiar with. That is generally the hallmark of a successful entrepreneur, to where it persists then generationally. And again, I'll take all that I've learned in the real world, in farming, building a distribution and logistics business, to know what I can do to nurture that as the leader of our state.
Well, it's the one thing that farmers and entrepreneurs have in common, and that is they wake up every day and they ask themselves the question, how do I do more with less?
Yeah.
So
and you've taken that phrase from me, probably unintentionally, but that's called productivity.
Absolutely.
Because you don't generally change things when you've got to have more of something to do the same thing. And that's called being innovative.
Yes.
It's called taking risk and trying to maybe do things that are somewhat out of your comfort zone.
So I have a question for you about the time that you spent over at USDA yesterday with Secretary Rollins. So can you give me a little bit of insight into what it was like, the time that you spent with her and the support that she's given, and just share with me, what was it like being there and being with the Secretary, and how did it feel to watch progress actually happening?
So I describe the Senate as being something like watching paint dry. It takes years. Even that bill passed 92-8 in the Senate. It got waylaid another year to get through all the mechanics. Here, Brooke is a ball of energy. She comes from an agricultural background. Oz and Kennedy were there as well. So we had the full A-team on how to approach things differently. So when you're being one of the 2 or 3 governors called to come back in reinforcement, my goal was maybe not to be in DC quite as much, but I'm going to come out for great ideas. And in that one stretch of 3, 4, 5 hours, we got a lot of information out there about how now you're going to have an administration that's going to be behind innovation, trying to do things differently in the toughest sector of our economy for entrepreneurs. I mean, what else could you pick that's got your business partner with all the things we've talked about, along with the weather?
Yeah.
So it's got to be something that changes, or else I don't think we're going to keep as many kids on the farm. It's not the same farming operation, what we were talking about earlier, but then when you tie in the wholesomeness of your food and entrepreneurial ways to offer farmers a way to make a living, and you're wrapping it all together, well, that's a dream for somebody like me that's been a serial entrepreneur that then decided to get into government. And now I know what you can do if you're going to be an enterprising governor. So I just thank my lucky stars that I made that decision years ago, because the dividends are paying off. And those 6 years in the Senate, I know how this place works.
Yeah.
And we're always going to be kind of connected with it. And I think that'll give me credibility when I come back here in terms of what can we do to make it easier for that important part of our economy.
So incredibly important, and you're so blessed to be the governor of the great state of Indiana, which has some of the most diverse growing conditions in the country. One of the best places with all different types of soil types, to include the sandy soil types that we need for fresh fruit and vegetable production, to an abundant amount of irrigation water in many pockets of the state. It really is the Garden of Eden in the state of Indiana.
Well, you mentioned as governor, and it wasn't even on the horizon 2 years ago, but now electricity, the availability of it for data centers, and water. Water is now something that probably 15 states have enough of it, and maybe some to spare, and we're one of them.
Yes.
So it brings a lot of things into focus, and if you're one of just 15 states, all the opportunity that means in terms, again, of what we do with agriculture. So I'm looking forward to it, and you never know what lies ahead of you once you do step into a new venture, but it's been fun. The 6 years in the Senate, I made that even a joyful experience, but as governor again, and you've got other governors that can follow quickly. I think the founders never intended the action to be primarily here. There's a thing called the 10th Amendment that if it's not enumerated, should be the responsibility of the states. And we live within our means. We don't have the printing press in the basement. And still, this place has got to fix itself and then be one that helps us as individuals, businesses, state governments. Don't make it harder for the folks that actually live that way. Make it easier somehow. And they're having their own wrestling match on how to do that.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the time that you've spent. Thank you so much, Governor Braun, for being here with us today. And I can't thank you enough for your leadership on topics that have been so important to me as a, like I say, half Hoosier for so many years. And it means so much to have you here, to have you at AFPI today. And thank you again, Governor. We appreciate it.
My pleasure to do it. And as I told you earlier, I invite you to come visit me in my hometown in Jasper or in Indianapolis when you're back in the state. I'd love to see your operations there as well.
Yeah, well, we would love to host you on our farm in Gibson County and share some of the Posey County abundance of melons this summer. Thank you so much, Governor.
You bet.
Have a great day.